Okay. I'm Steve Elkins, and I represent Richfield, Bloomington, and Edina on the Metropolitan Council. And prior to being appointed by the governor to the Metropolitan Council about 2 years ago, I was a city council member in Bloomington for 9 years. Before that, I was a member of the Planning Commission, and before that, I was a member of the Traffic Commission in Bloomington. And I've also served on the Bloomington Housing and Redevelopment Authority Board for about 5 years during my term as a council member. So on the Met Council, I serve on the Transportation and Community Development Committees. And along with transportation policy, housing policy has been something that has been among the topics that I put the most effort into trying to understand and try and come up with the solutions. And I have to say that of all of the problems that I study, this is probably the most intractable. Sometimes, for transportation, for example, the problems are difficult, but you can usually see how, with reasonable changes in policy and a reasonable amount of additional money, that there's a way to solve a problem. And I can't say that I know anybody who is confident that they feel that they know how to solve the affordable housing problem. So a little bit of an overview on Met Council and its role. So its overarching role is to foster the orderly and economic development of the Twin Cities region, which is defined as the 7-county area, not the 13-county area defined by the Census Bureau. And the primary planning responsibilities are for regional transportation, water and wastewater, regional park planning, and regional housing planning. And of course, we actually operate the region's wastewater treatment system, Metropolitan Council Environmental Services, and the region's largest transit operator, Metro Transit. Okay. So one of the tasks that we're charged to by state law as part of our housing planning responsibilities is to forecast the need for affordable housing in the region. And we're currently in a near the beginning of a 10-year planning cycle that will culminate in 2018. And so we're currently developing an overall regional blueprint, which we're calling Thrive 2040, which, as the name implies, is a plan that will extend out for the next 25 years or so. That'll be the first document that we produce is the overall blueprint, and we expect to have that circulating by the end of this year. And then following that, we have to develop what are called system plans for wastewater, transportation, parks, and this year we're going to do one in this cycle for housing. Our predecessors hadn't actually done a housing system plan for about 20 years, so this is going to be the first time that a Met Council has tackled one in this much detail as we're going to do in this round. So as part of that, we're charged by state law with projecting the need on a regional basis for affordable housing across the planning period, and then also allocating it among the communities in the region. This year we're going to be redoing the methodology for that from scratch. So the last time the methodology was revisited was in 2006. And there have been a lot of changes in the demographics in the region that have changed significantly the demand for different types of housing, including different types of affordable housing. And you're seeing that here in the the Stantec survey for Richfield that was done. And for example, seeing that because historically, way back in the 60s, when a lot of the rental housing here was built, it was mostly occupied by young people who were not yet forming households, who then moved on to single-family housing with their families when they could afford to. We have a preponderance of studios and one-bedroom units. units, and now that the affordable housing demand is largely more families, many immigrant families, we've got a mismatch between the supply and demand by type of housing. So those are, for those types of reasons, we're planning to revisit all of our methodologies from scratch. As a result of redoing those, there'll be new allocations of affordable housing need to cities in the region, probably by the end of 2014. So once the Met Council has all of its system plans completed and published, which we hope to have all of them done by the end of 2014, then the next step in the process is that the cities and counties take those system plans and update their own municipal and county comprehensive plans. Okay? And the cities and counties in the regions are required by state law to redo their comprehensive plans also once every 10 years and submit them to the Metropolitan Council for review by, in this case, 2018. And the Met Council reviews each of the city and county plans, as do neighboring cities and counties get a chance to comment on them as well. We review them for consistency with the regional plan and can approve them or disapprove them. And in the case of what we call non-conformities with the regional plan, for some of the system plans like transportation and wastewater, we actually have the authority to require changes to local comprehensive plans. But the housing system plan does not have the same sort of force of law that some of the other system plans do. So in the area of affordable housing, the legislature in its infinite wisdom has given us all carrots and no sticks. Okay. So the primary carrot is a program called the Livable Communities program. And the Livable Communities grant program is a competitive grant program. It's funded by an allocation of revenue out of the Fiscal Disparities Program. It's a competitive grant program, and you've actually got a handout that describes the Livable Communities program. We've got 4 main accounts: tax-based revitalization, which is all about brownfield cleanup as part of redevelopment projects. The Livable Communities Demonstration Account, which supports development and redevelopment that links housing, jobs, and services while demonstrating efficient and cost-effective use of land and resources. The Local Housing Incentives Account produces and preserves affordable housing choices for households with low to moderate incomes. And the Land Acquisition and Affordable New Development Program, which provides communities with no-interest loans to help address affordable housing needs. So, between 1996 and 2011, we have dispersed, about $250 million through these programs and incentive grants to local communities. Okay. And Richfield, if you want to think about projects here locally that where Met Council has contributed funding, in the 66th and Lyndale area, the new apartment buildings on the northeast side of the intersection received a Metropolitan Council grant, and the Lyndale Gardens redevelopment project has also recently received a grant award to help with the redevelopment of that side under the Livable Communities Demonstration Account. We've actually set up a sub-account within that to foster transit-oriented developments, and the Lyndale Gardens site was funded under that program. Within comprehensive plans, each city's and county's comprehensive plan has to include specific elements that address transportation, land use, and one of the required chapters is housing. And so every comprehensive plan, including Richfield's, includes a housing chapter that describes the city's policies, goals, and strategies related to the creation of affordable housing. And we should probably include that in the binder, actually, as well. Because I hear from time to time that Richfield doesn't have a housing plan, and every city has a housing plan. It's called the housing element of your comprehensive plan. So I think it's relatively short. It's 16 pages long, and it's probably ought to go into the binder and to be familiarized with, because I think one of our expectations will be that out of the process that you guys are participating in, that feedback will result in an updated housing policy, which will be reflected in the city's comprehensive plan in 2018. Okay. So we're right in the middle right now of our discussions about how we want to reshape some of these policies. And I think some of the things that we're talking about in great detail and having very animated discussions amongst ourselves are some of the issues that I know are of great concern to you. So we received a federal grant for transit planning in the region to help us better coordinate our transportation and land use planning. And as a condition of receiving that grant, we are undergoing what's called a fair housing equity assessment right now, and looking at our own policies for housing and transportation in the region to see how, to what degree our own policies are contributing to regional equity, and how we need to change them in order to better address them. And one of the particular things that we're required to do under this grant is come up with a methodology and a policy by which we will address the amelioration of what are called concentrations of race and poverty. And so we're developing policies that will define what we think consists of a concentration of race and poverty. And so we've been having some very interesting presentations by some of the nation's leading experts on these topics are local. So we had one panel a couple of weeks ago where we had both Myron Orfield, who many of you are very familiar with, and Ed Getz, who is the head of the regional policy program at the Humphrey School. And they're both very bright people. They don't always agree with each other, and so it becomes a very animated and interesting discussion. But if I could paraphrase what I heard on this panel, Myron Orfield is of the opinion that we have to do everything that we can to disperse concentrations of race and poverty as completely as we can. And if he had entirely his own way, we would not invest in affordable housing anywhere except in the lily white exurbs. That's probably a little bit of an exaggeration of Myron's position, whereas Professor Getz is, his position is that no, we can't, just do that. We also have to reinvest in communities that are currently under distress, and help improve some of those communities as well. So the discussion has been, focused right now just because it's the focus of a great deal of transit investment on the Central Corridor. And so the eastern part of the Central Corridor, the areas in St. Paul just west of downtown, have very high concentrations of both minority populations and relatively high levels of poverty as well. And so Myron kind of gets upset when we find ourselves subsidizing the redevelopment of the station areas along the eastern part of the Central Corridor, because he's afraid that we're just going to, re-emphasize the, contribute to the further ghettoization of those areas, whereas Professor Getz's point of view is that we have to invest in those communities, and we have to create new, well-managed and comparatively affordable housing. For people in those communities have a way to stay in the communities, because what we heard when we went out to those communities is there's a very strong sense of community in many of them, and people don't want to be gentrified out of those neighborhoods. So it's a very delicate balance for us to balance these competing considerations and come up with a policy that makes sense and accomplish what we all want to accomplish. But part of the to keep this in perspective, our demographers are telling us that as part of our 2040 planning, that we should be planning for a region which in 2040 is 40% minority. So it's barely would be considered minority, and that's a tremendous change for the Twin Cities, or for the Minnesota, the state as a whole, which has historically been one of the whitest states and regions in the country. So when we're pondering a question like what percentage of race or what percentage of poverty should be considered a concentration, we have to do it in the context of understanding that by the end of this planning cycle, 40% of the region is likely to consist of people of color. So in our preliminary discussions, have kind of come to a consensus that as far as race goes, that the guideline should probably be at around 50%. When it comes to poverty, one of the kind of pragmatic consideration that we find ourselves in is that the amount of money that's available to invest in affordable housing programs is a pittance compared to the need, which is why I say I think it's the most intractable problem that I study. And so we're basically looking at maintaining basically status quo, which would be consistent with the definitions of the relative poverty that you see presented in the Stantec proposed study, and basically because if we try and if we adopted a policy of subsidizing housing to make it affordable to people who are earning less than, or families that are earning less than $30,000 or $40,000 a year, we could serve so few families. Because the amount of subsidy that is required as you go down to greater and greater levels of affordability, we just wouldn't be able to have a very broad impact at all. We are, I should mention, the largest housing and redevelopment authority in the region. So many cities and counties have their own HRAs, but the Met Council maintains an HRA for the communities that don't. And we administer about a third of the Section 8 vouchers in the entire region. And as was previously mentioned, the holders of those vouchers get to choose where they're going to live, and that's kind of the point of the program. And should also mention that one of the consequences of the sequester, which is these broad brush across the board cuts, we currently administer about 6,200 Section 8 grants. It's about a third of the region's total. And as a result of the sequester, we're looking at having to we're planning to do it by attrition and subsidize a slow rate of attrition out of our HRA reserves. But we're looking at having to eventually drop 500 families out of Section 8. And if you extrapolate that out across the region, you're looking at well over 1,000 families losing their Section 8 vouchers over the next year or so. So we're not real happy to be doing that, but the Section 8 program is funded entirely out of federal funds. What else should I mention here? I think that those were kind of some of the main points that I wanted to mention. But I want to thank you all for doing all of this, because I do see this feeding directly into the city's comprehensive plan process, which I would hope will be nicely dovetail into our regional plans as well. And I'm happy to answer some questions too. Okay.
Before
if
you could repeat the question, because
sure.
Steve is mic'd for the camera, but we're not.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
My question is, in the list of 4 programs that you have here
Yep.
that you administer, do those funds go to the city or to the developer?
They go to the projects through the cities. So it's the city and the developer, more or less, as a practical matter, are coming together to the Met Council as partners. And I should mention that in all of those grant programs, not just the affordable housing specific program, there are points that are awarded for housing affordability. Even the transportation grant programs, so we allocate federal transportation dollars coming into the region. Even those competitive grant programs, there are points to be won for having a good affordable housing policy in your community. And that's something I see us actually strengthening as we go forward. We're actually tweaked the criteria just actually last night at a community development panel meeting, and we'll probably make more extensive changes as we go through our system planning process. But one of the things which I know you guys would be interested in is that we'd ask staff to give priority to projects, affordable housing projects that have multiple bedroom units in them, because you guys aren't the only ones seeing that particular mismatch. And I should mention one other trend that we're starting to see, especially in the affordable housing grant program, is that we're starting to see cities applying for and winning grants for the rehabilitation of existing affordable housing projects in their cities. So.
Actually, you just partially answered my question. I was going to ask, what about rehabilitation of existing?
Yep, the rehabilitation projects are eligible, and then the last round of grants, an existing affordable housing project, 30 years old, a senior housing project, was awarded funding for the rehabilitation and continued affordability of those units.
And do you see those, the awarding of those subsidies increasing?
Yeah, I do. I think one of the
criteria for even...
Yeah, well, I should say that one of the things that the feedback that all of the members of the current council are hearing, and that I very confident is going to be reflected in in this next round of plans, is that Richfield isn't the only city that has a large supply of affordable housing in the form of older housing stock, and there's I think an increasing recognition that that we want to incentivize communities to preserve that housing stock and keep it maintained. Because if we don't provide incentives for communities to maintain their existing supply of affordable housing, given the age of much of it, I could easily foreseeable see a future in which we actually end up going backwards on our affordable housing supply, because if properties are allowed to run down, they may well redevelop to other uses.
Follow up. What about, so when we talk about affordable with a little a versus affordable with a big A being subsidized housing versus little a being affordable because it's
naturally affordable.
Naturally affordable.
Yeah.
What about, studies have shown that it's not 100% anything that is the best possible path. It's a mixture of market rate and affordable with a big A.
Mm-hmm.
Is the Met Council promoting programs that support documented HUD best practices?
I don't know how to paraphrase the whole thing, but basically we're asking about, I think I understand what the gist of the question is that how do we incentivize mixed income projects as opposed to projects that are entirely affordable by whatever definition. And this is a question that I have been researching myself lately, and what I'm finding is that in talking with people with Minnesota Housing, with whom we coordinate our programs very carefully, nobody can put their finger on anything that is in the current laws or policies, certainly that requires developers to come forward with 100% affordable projects. But that does seem to be what we're seeing, and as near as I've been able to determine, it's primarily because that makes it easier for the developer to remarket the federal tax credits that are associated with the project. So, and I don't know how we get around that. That seems to be the nub of the problem, but there isn't anything that any of the related agencies, whether it's the Met Council or Minnesota Housing or HUD, is specifically doing to encourage 100% projects. That seems to be what the market is developing because it's the just because for financial reasons. It's easier for the developer to remarket the housing credits on 100% affordable projects because it's the same amount of work, whether it's 20% affordable or 100% affordable, and so you get a bigger return for the same amount of work. So I agree it's an issue. I don't know what the answer is yet. Okay. Mm-hmm.
Steve, maybe for some folks here, they might not understand that secondary market for tax credit purposes.
Yeah, and so a big part of the subsidy, so what I'm talking about in terms of these credits, a big part of the subsidy actually comes in the form of federal credits. And you earn the credits by having, including units that are affordable in your project. But typically, it's the credits actually get sold off to investors, and that's the way the developer kind of monetizes the credits.
Is there a very certain type of situation with the Section 8 people? I know you should see you're losing 1,000. Who decides who gets what?
Yeah, that's a good question, Mike. So, who decides who gets the Section 8 vouchers?
Section 8, yeah.
And it's kind of first come first serve, but there is so much more demand for the vouchers than there are vouchers that usually an HRA will open its waiting list every couple of years, and frequently there will be lotteries to see who gets on the waiting list. And I think right now we have, for our HRA, I think over 5,000 families on the waiting list. And so most families who apply for a Section 8 voucher and get onto the waiting list usually wait years before they ever get one. So the demand for these vouchers far outstrips the supply, which is determined entirely by the level of federal funding that we get. Yeah.
You mentioned earlier about the mix, and at some point down the road, you said something like 41% of our population will be what you say minorities. What cultures are you including in that mix, and what impact do you think that'll have on the demand for this affordable housing we're talking about?
Yeah.
Increase of, decrease of demand?
Well, the 40% is everybody except non-Hispanic whites. Okay, and in terms of what will it do, to the demand for different types of housing, I think a lot of the increase, certainly in recent years' data, has come from from immigration. In many cases, from immigration from outside the country. And culturally, most foreign cultures, we're kind of actually odd in that we have one home per nuclear family. In most other cultures, the tradition is multiple generations of a family living under one roof. And that's true. We had every April in Bloomington we have the annual block captains workshop, and I think about 3 years ago they made that kind of the topic, and so we had panel discussions with I think on one panel we had a Russian, Vietnamese, Somali, and Mexican, and the one thing they could all agree on is that they wanted housing that would enable them to have multiple generations of their families under one roof. So, and I think so you usually would expect them to, especially as new immigrants, to kind of gravitate towards smaller single-family homes. One of the things that we saw is that even the smaller homes, and people are probably making bedrooms out of in their basements, might have 2 or 3 bedrooms. But one of the other interesting demographic trends with respect to our smaller, rambler-type housing in most of the older suburbs is that those houses are also very appealing to downsizing empty nesters. So it's been a source of some consternation to school districts like Richfield, Bloomington, Brooklyn Center, Brooklyn Park, that as these homes turn over to new generations, the demographics aren't always changing that much. Because what Hazel Reinhardt, who is a former state demographer, does a lot of work now for school districts, studied this and found that what was happening in many of these communities is that you'd have one empty nester age out of their housing and just be replaced by another empty nester. Because you're downsizing, you're getting closer in, and you've got single level living. And I know just knocking on doors and campaigning in Bloomington, I was surprised at how many people who were recently just had moved to Bloomington were telling me, oh yeah, the kids grew up and I moved in here from Prior Lake because I couldn't stand the commute anymore. So I know certainly in Bloomington, I would think the same thing is probably true here as well. We were expecting that as the first generation of East Bloomington homeowners aged out of their homes, that we'd get a whole new generation of families, and a resurgence in household size, and it hasn't happened to anywhere near the degree that we expected it to. Joe?
I read a report in USA Today the other day about the long-term forecast of the housing market kind of flipping upside down for them seniors or people, the aging community, moving out into smaller homes. So there's going to be a large surplus in the next 15 years.
Large homes in the exurbs, yeah. So I don't know if camera probably didn't pick that one up, but we're talking about the demographic change in mix because of things like the changing preferences as people as they get age. Yeah, well, yeah, but there's one point, because I read a study that Fannie Mae did several years ago, just respective with the impact of the baby boomers, and their point was that. Even if if baby boomers express on kind of their typical historical changes in preferences they age, and which is only a slight shift away from single family to more communal types of living, just the sheer numbers of baby boomers, what it would mean is that just to accommodate that slight shift in baby boomer preferences, you wouldn't have to build another single-family home for the next 20 years, just because they would be freeing up so many single-family homes as they moved into more communal living type situations.
Well, not just that, but if we're talking about the boomers, yes, that's the largest demographic in history, but they're aging out. And if we're looking at planning for future generations, we should be looking more towards the Gen Ys. I'm a Gen Xer, but Gen Ys, which is in fact the second largest demographic population in history. And the Gen Xers and the Gen Ys are following a trend moving into the, moving out of the exurbs, moving out of the suburbs and moving into the inner city.
Yep.
Which has actually pushed a lot of the inner city, the existing inner city population into the first and second ranked suburbs. So, I mean, you can see that exactly in Minneapolis.
Yeah, but you see, as a result of that as well, it's kind of a confluence. You've got both, aging empty nesters and, Gen Yers all wanting the same kind of an urban living experience.
Absolutely.
Yep. I know my daughters are, late 20s, early 30s right now, and they don't want a car.
Well, also with gas prices going through the roof.
Yeah.
I mean, we're looking at a population that doesn't want cars, exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Who wants to take the bus, who wants to live who wants to live within transportation distance of where they work. And they're not looking at things in the way that we have historically looked at living and working.
Yep. No,
Sorry.
my younger daughter just moved to Atlanta from San Francisco, and talk about culture shock. But she shopped and finally found herself an apartment in it's called the Midtown area of Atlanta. She's next to the big park there. But she found herself an apartment where she is within walking distance of the MARTA station that will take her to within 2 blocks of her job in the exurbs. And she wanted it badly enough that she held out until she found an apartment with those characteristics, a walkable neighborhood near a park and near transit.
With amenities, restaurants.
With amenities, yep.
Grocery stores that you can walk to or bike to.
Yep.
That's the future, is what I can see.
Yep. Yeah,
Are
Jeremy.
there any considerations at the Met Council as you're, looking at future growth patterns and things like that? Some of the trends of people aging in place or striving to age in place versus moving into some of those communal senior situations?
Yeah, so the question was, are we looking at as part of our study of demographic trends, what are the implications of, aging boomers wanting to age in place? And so we definitely are seeing that. I know, I'll speak for Bloomington, we're not seeing homes turn over anywhere near as quickly as we thought they would as people aged, and a lot of that is just because those houses where they raised their families are still perfect empty nester homes. They're relatively small, they're single level for the most part, and so there's no reason for them to move. But I know, certainly in Bloomington, we were explicitly, planning for, when the time comes when they don't want that kind of living anymore because they don't want or can't maintain those homes anymore. We want to make sure that we have an ample supply of life cycle housing so that they can stay in Bloomington as they age, even beyond the time when they can maintain that single family home. I know we have the city has an annual volunteer breakfast every spring. And the first time I ever went to one as a new city council member, the thing that struck me was what a large percentage of our volunteer population consisted of retired seniors. You can't afford to lose that. So yeah, so I think making sure that we've got the supply of the variety of different types of housing that seniors are going to want in the right amounts is very important to us. Yeah.
Are you, at the Met Council level, are you guys requiring or thinking about requiring communities that don't have a large base of affordable housing to take on more of it?
Yeah, so this is one of this odd areas of the law. So we're charged with forecasting the need for affordable housing and allocating, to each community their fair share, but we don't actually have any enforcement authority. So the only thing that we can really do substantively is withhold the carrots. So we steer the carrots towards the cities that are accommodating their fair share of affordable housing.
So if that city doesn't need the carrot, they won't come for the carrot, right?
Yep. All the cities like the carrots, though.
Edina doesn't.
I
They
did,
were forced to put in Yorktown homes. They weren't encouraged to.
yeah,
And that was in the 70s. Sorry.
yeah, I
I
just,
have a follow-up question. Does the Met Council see any possibility to offer communities more incentive where the jobs are? You know, if the city has jobs there, shouldn't they be putting more of an emphasis on those communities to kind of with not only a carrot but with a stick to force them to put the job, you know, the workforce housing over there?
the legislature did not give us any sticks, only carrots. Okay, so we
You do have sticks on the books, you just don't use them.
yeah, okay.
I mean, you don't. And would you answer?
Unless, you know, unless you consider,
It's a great example, where Richfield has our maintenance facility, and the Minnesota Housing Finance Agency was given, what, 12 million, 10 million to build low-income housing there. Grandview, Edina, which is their city maintenance site, which is abandoned. The Metropolitan Council, you folks, have given them $100,000 to do a green study for luxury housing, which will be luxury housing because they're not looking at low income.
okay, I attended several meetings of the Grandview Task Force. It was a very large community task force. And the plan,
Brought up low income housing.
no, I'm sorry, but the task force's plan put a very high emphasis on including affordable housing in the redevelopment of that area.
Plan. If they mention it,
No.
that's never been brought up in the community meeting.
Not here to argue with you tonight, Joe. Okay.
But I will ask one other thing, just two questions.
Actually, really quick though, our committee is supposed to adjourn at 8:30.
Yeah. And I'd like to hear from members of the committee, actually.
Yeah, and so I think if we could just wrap it up and see if anyone else on the task force has questions and then maybe take it offline.
Yeah, that'd be appropriate. No?
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for having me.